And now, it's time for TJwow.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Training Journal webinars. This is the launch. This is our very first one, and we are very excited to be here. I am your host. I'm Jo Cook. I am the Deputy Editor of Training Journal, and some of you will know me from webinars and live online work, and I'm really looking forward to our session that we have today. Now, the way that we are going to approach this is a little bit different maybe from some other webinars. It's not about presentations. It's not about one person speaking the whole time. I love this quote that I was reminded of at the weekend by Charles Jennings from the late and great J. Cross, all about conversation. And that's what I want our sessions to be about. For me, it's about, at a conference or at an event, I think I learn the most from deep, good quality conversation with people. And that's what we are doing today. So you've got that chat window, you've been using that brilliantly. Please use that loads and loads with each other. You've also got at the very bottom of the screen the question and answer pod. If you have a question, please do let us know and we'll make sure we cover that. Also, if you've got your microphone, you can use that raise hand icon at the very top of the screen to say, I've got a question or a comment, and you can chat with our speakers. If you're on Twitter, you can join in the conversation with the TJwow hashtag for the week of webinars. We've got a whole week lined up for you, and I'll tell you more about those later on. All of our webinars will be recorded on the trainingjournal.com website. You can go and have a look at those and upcoming webinars too. Lastly, but by no means least, let me please introduce our webinar today. Firstly, the topic, the state of our L&D industry and what's going on, but also more importantly, three amazing people that I have with us. I'm very lucky to introduce you to Sunder Ramachandran, Beverley, Aylott, and Donald H. Taylor, all absolutely brilliant in the industry. Sunder Ramachandran is Head of Learning at Pfizer, Beverley Aylott is Head of Learning at AbbVie, and Donald H. Taylor, well, he's just head of everything, I think, and an industry professional. So without further ado, let's bring us in on webcam. Here we go. So you're going to be able to see us. Now, if you're on a tablet device, hopefully that will still work. But here we go. Here's everybody. Let's do some proper introductions now. So, Sunder, tell us just in a nutshell, what is it that you do and what are you excited about in the industry at the moment?
Hi, Joe, and hello, everybody. Thank you for making the time for this discussion. So I run commercial training for Pfizer in India. As most of you may know, we're in the pharmaceutical business. We've
Oh, I don't know if we just lost Sunder there
got
for a
about
moment. We'll come back to
3,000
Sunder. Let's go
sales
to
colleagues
Beverley Aylott. Now,
spread
you're
all
in the
across the
pharmaceutical
country,
business as
and
well,
my
aren't you,
job is to
Beverley?
put together sales
Hi.
enablement and sales development programs for them. So I'm looking forward to really getting views from my co-panelists as well as from other members on what are some of the changes that
Thank you,
they're
Sunder.
seeing
We
in the
seem to have some
landscape
lag there for a
and
moment. This
how
is
they're
one of the
responding to them.
joys of
So
live and
looking forward to
webcams
today's
and lots of
discussion. Thank
bandwidth.
you for having me.
Beverley Aylott, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Please carry on.
Perfect. Always worth checking, isn't it? Yes, my name is Beverley Aylott. I'm head of learning for a biopharmaceutical company called AbbVie. I'm based in the UK, but we're a global organization. And there's just so much to talk about when it comes to the future of the L&D industry. Just really excited to weigh in on some conversations and hear what people have to say. I was at the CIPD conference, the L&D show last week, and the phrase that I came away with that I've been pondering on is point of need. That's in my my notebook right now.
Now that sounds interesting, and we'll come back to that about point of need in a moment. And Mr. Donald H. Taylor, please tell us a little bit about yourself and what are you excited about in the industry? That sounds really important. So, I mean, that was something you were talking about a little bit at the CIPD conference and the video that we shared, Beverley. Could you just elaborate on that, on being ready, and you were talking about kind of technology as well?
Sorry, there is a delay as you unmute. You mute and unmute.
So, Beverley, tell us a little bit about what you were thinking with regards to the state of the point of need, the state of the industry, and you were talking a little bit about technology in your CIPD video as well.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm not particularly savvy when it comes to technology, but I don't think that's going to wash any longer. I think we all have to be really comfortable with all technology. Really good example is we're delivering coaching skills workshops at the moment to our field force, and they can't come off the field. The company's growing, very successful. Why on earth would we tell someone in Scotland to fly down for a half-day workshop? We can't do it anymore. It's just not feasible. It's not sensible. So we have to deliver the knowledge portion by WebEx. So we have to be really slick and good on WebEx. So for me, it's a done deal now. We have to understand how to use video conferencing, WebExes, chat, Jabber, blogs, all that kind of great technology. As a learning professional, we have to really get on top of it now.
I always say it's people who are doing stuff.
Absolutely, and I think it's one of those huge challenges that we have around updating our skills. So there's the technology element, which is
I'm not excited,
it's not my
Joe.
whole
I'm worried.
career. It's
my worry
my
is
forte,
that we
I
have
like and appreciate, especially that online part of the WebEx and stuff that you mentioned, Beverley. But also I think there are other skills as well. Sunder, what are you seeing as some of maybe the kind of business-oriented skills rather than the technology skills?
The point where things are changing fairly fast with learning and development, and in the business environment that we're in, it's an exciting time potentially.
Hi,
lots of opportunities, also
I think
potentially
clearly the
dangerous
ability
time.
to sort of move away from
Could we be
just being
left
an order taker, which traditionally is how
in a backwater
training
and
or
ignored
learning
by the rest of the
professionals were
business? What
seen,
can we do to prevent that?
to be
That's
able to do more
what keeps me
meaningful,
going, making sure that our
consulting work, which is
profession
really,
really
sort
ready
of
for
getting involved
21st
with the
century.
business right from the planning stage, and then understand, what's the value that, training or learning can sort of add. So, partnership, consulting skills is clearly something that's emerging. But the other skill that I believe is also very critical is, learning professionals need to have a good understanding of consumer platforms, and often, we can confuse understanding consumer platforms with technology, which it actually not. What I mean is a good understanding of what's happening in the social media, an understanding of how people consume information, how people search for information in today's time, right? Because I think that is critical to the way we design programs, that is critical to the way we reward people.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I think that's something that a lot of people are struggling with. And a lot of people are doing really well from what I see.
And just keeping your
now,
eyes and
you
ears
mentioned
open
earlier
to
on, Beverley, about that point of need is what I think you said. Is that to do with the learning part? The technology part? Is that the business, or is it something else completely and I've misinterpreted you?
I think it's all of it actually, and I think it's just building on point from before. The world we live in now is a 24/7 world, and we need to be adjusting to that people want to learn what they want, when they want, how they want. They don't want to have to wait 5 months to book onto a course if they're just about to go into a customer meeting or a one-to-one. They want to know then, how do I do this? What's the checklist? What video can I watch? What are my peers saying about this? So for me, it's about understanding when are our customers, for us as L&D professionals, needing to know their stuff, and how can we give it to them when they need it, not when we want them to have it, but when they
that's a
want to
really
have
big
it.
challenge. For a long time, learning and development have been order takers. Like, here's our menu of learning. Please, let's measure the amount of people that have come onto our courses. And actually, we haven't got enough people to run this course, so you'll have to wait another 6 weeks or another 6 months for your training. So, yeah, very important point. Now, guys, if you've got thoughts on this, maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, please use that chat window. You've also got the Q&A pod. I noticed, Constantidis from Australia, you've put a question in there. We'll come to that in just a moment. Now, Sunder, Frank Halberg has asked, can you please be more specific about about which social media to involve users and consumers and other external people? I think I've read that out right, Frank. So Sunder, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think to begin with, I would think the most obvious platforms would be Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. And the reason I sort of mentioned those three is because I believe those are great proxies to what good internal learning platforms should look like. There is obviously a reason why, platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter are able to sort of get a lot of engagement, while you and I may wonder why our internal social networks don't drive that sort of traffic. So I think we need to sort of really look at what are the engagement principles that some of these platforms are using, and then what of that can be applied within the corporate environment. So that's what I meant by watching what's happening in the social media space, because that's
That sounds great,
how the
Sunder. Thank you. I
mindsets
think
of
there are so
people
many
in the
things that
way
are
they consume
changing perhaps in
information
our
is being shaped,
actual
and
world,
there are
if you
lessons
like,
we
that we
can
then have
learn,
to
and we can
reflect
use those
or
as
look at
analogies,
in the learning and development
even
world.
within the corporate
Don,
training
do you have
environment.
any thoughts on that in particular? That's quite all right. So yeah, Don's camera has frozen, but luckily it's on a good point where you look very interested in the conversation, Don. So that's no problem at all. Sunder was talking about how some of our social media and things are working differently in life in general now. If we think of Snapchat and Facebook and the way we consume media these days, and how that's changing, and we have to be aware of that in learning and development. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. Absolutely brilliant and very, very well made point there. In the chat window, Anne Nash had said, absolutely agree about point of need that Beverley was speaking about. I think it's the most useful way of supporting people. I also think point of need resources can really help high performing talent, I think is what you meant there, Anne, feel empowered to act. Now, I know you made another point there, Anne. I haven't lost that, don't worry. So whilst I've got you, Don, and we'll come back to Sunder and Beverley also, obviously, but Don, Constantidis from Australia has written in our Q&A pod a little question there, and I think it's really interesting. So Con asks Don, you said you were worried. What do we, learning and development, need to do to ease this worry? So it's quite broad, and I'll come to Beverley and Sunder on that after you, Don. But what are your first thoughts? Brilliant, Don. Thank you. So, Beverley, let me come to you in your area, and it's such an important area. I mean, any kind of development, I think, is important. But when you're talking about things that are highly technical, as in your industry, this can become even more important, I think, to make sure you're getting under the skin of what's right. And that's what performance consulting is about, going, well, hang on, what's the presenting need, what's the real need, and let's really
Joe,
get to understand what's going on.
My camera there, which is,
how do you do this in your industry, and how does it work for you?
Could you repeat the question to me, Joe? Sorry.
Well, that's a very big question there you've thrown out, Joe. I mean, I absolutely agree that we should be performance consultants, not just deliverers of stuff. I think it's really important that we have that kind of relationship with our business stakeholders. So we can ask difficult questions, we can challenge, we can push back, but also we can make insightful observations. So I'll give you an example. So at my team meeting last week, we spent our time looking at all the data we could find around part of our business, how they were performing, their culture survey results, their structures, who's come in, who's new, how long they've been there. So understand how we could work with them, where there was opportunities for building their capability. So that, for me, is a really good example of how learning and development people should be spending their time, working out what is it we can add value to, how can we interact with this part of the business, how can we help them to achieve their goals and build their capability. And the next step for us then is to go to the management team to talk to them about, these are our thoughts, our suggestions, our ideas, how would you like to work with us and take this forward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Beverley. And I think that's really important, that kind of conversation, that agreement moving forward. Sunder, what about in your area of your work with regard to performance consulting? And we're going back to that business alignment kind of question, I think, there. How do you approach that, and how does it work for you?
Well, I think in the pharmaceutical business, it's an ongoing conversation with the business, primarily because, the rate at which the industry is evolving and, just the competitive landscape. uh, really places that demand for you to remain flexible, number one, and to just keep going back to business and understanding what the needs are. One of the ways we facilitate that within the learning department is to ensure that we actually go out there and spend time in the market. So, I do a lot of field time. We do a lot of market visits just to get a pulse of, what's really happening in the marketplace firsthand, and then come back and have conversations with the business leaders around what we saw and just get calibrated with, what their views are, and then sort of design a solution or a roadmap or a learning track, if you will. So, in our business, consulting is not like a one-time quarterly discussion or a big conversation. It's really a day-to-day, engagement, day-to-day understanding of, what's happening,
Brilliant,
what's
thank you. And that's
changing,
almost
and then
working at
as
that
far as
strategic
possible,
level, really, rather than
trying
the
to be
reactive level, which
predictive
is
in
something
our
that's really
approach,
important.
so
And
we can sort
again,
of,
we've been talking about in the industry for
anticipate
so many
problems
years, how does
before
learning
they
and
happen, if
development
you will.
get to that top table? And I think one of the ways that we need to do that is by having really good relationships throughout the business and really good conversations. So a question has come in on Q&A pod. Thank you, Frank. Frank Halberg says, Beverley and Donald, please give examples of what you mean by having difficult conversations. Thank you very much in advance. So, Beverley, what are the kind of challenging conversations that you've had to deal with, and maybe just a couple of little nuggets of strategy of how you've done it?
Yeah, so I think for me that if you want to be a performance consultant, part of your responsibility, your role is to challenge. So when I say it's difficult, people, particularly in the UK, don't like any kind of conflict. But if your relationship is strong, then you should be able to have those challenging conversations. So let me give you some examples. So I would say if one of the stakeholders is very sure about a solution that they want, and actually the conversation is more around, tell me more about the need. I need to understand what's driving this, what the need is. So there can be some, I guess, frustration there from a stakeholder if they're absolutely certain this is the solution I want, and you're not simply saying yes, because you're not an order taker, you're a consultant. So you're trying to dig beneath that request and identify what's the need here, what's driving this. And actually, a lot of the time, the solution that they've come to you with isn't the right solution for the need that they've actually identified. So the conversation normally is around challenging back on what the intervention is. And some examples, people typically like to work with externals that they've worked with before, that they've enjoyed working with. So when you're challenging somebody around, actually give me the data, show me the impact, what was the result, and there's nothing there, it can be a little bit frustrating for your stakeholder because they're saying, well, yeah, we had a great time, we loved it, we enjoyed it. But actually part of my role is to say, well, what was the impact of that intervention? If you can't show that there was any impact, let's not run that again.
What an absolutely brilliant example, Beverley. Thank you so much. And so, Don, the same question to you from Frank Halberg. Examples of what you mean by having difficult conversations.
Beverley's given some great examples there, and I'd reiterate it, but the slightly different approach. So Beverley said somebody comes along with an external they've used before, and you know what? They just had a good. There was something about it they liked, but did it work? No, it didn't. So absolutely, you have to tackle that head on, but in a polite way. But another classic question is when the person comes and says, "My team needs some insert course here training," and that could be time management training. Usually the answer is, and you won't say this to the person, no, actually, they don't need time management training. You need training on how to be a better manager. Because usually that's the problem. It isn't the team's fault, it's the manager's fault. However, if you confront people as baldly as that, it's not going to work in most cultures. In the UK culture, as Beverley says, we're particularly confrontation averse, and so it's much better simply to focus on the need and drill down on where the pain is. And I always go back to Nigel Harrison's points about establishing trust, understanding the need, and then building a solution.
Yeah, I think you make some wonderful points there, Don. Thank you for bringing up the Nigel Harrison model and all of those points that you just shared. You can go and Google that, guys, and find some more about performance consulting. And I think that we all have these conversations in any part of our life, but especially in learning and development where we're trying to look at increasing our seat at the top table, maybe being more business aligned and strategic.
How painful that gap is.
I had an example recently where I had a client of mine wanted me to do some training, train the trainer for virtual training skills, which is one of my specialisms. And we'd agreed all the learning points, we understood the need, we'd gone through, you know, what's environmental, what's knowledge, what's skills, and all of these things. And I'd actually used a little bit of the Kathy Moore action planning kind of model and discussion in terms of what do people actually need to do at the end of this. So this is that measurable outcome, that actual kind of point that we need people to do. And at the end of the conversation, the person said, right, brilliant, when can you come to our Oxfordshire campus? When can you come to our Sussex campus? I said, whoa, this is about virtual skills. We should do it virtually. And we actually had a 50-minute phone call, which was one of those challenging conversations where you're absolutely right. It was establishing the trust, the rapport, and just talking through all of the different points to break down the need in order to basically convince and challenge somebody as to a different way of doing. And you know what? Hugely successful, and they're very glad I challenged them. So it's really actually worthwhile kind of honing those skills and looking at those different models. So as I say, and Don's just shared the action mapping from Kathy Moore. Thank you, Don. Oh, your webcam's looking a bit funny there, Don. We might have to stop that in a moment. Now, Sunder, in the chat window earlier on, whilst we were having this discussion, you shared and you said it also helps to take off our L&D hat sometimes and contribute as another business colleague. Every business problem does not necessitate, oh, I can't say that, Sunder, necessitate a training solution. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, you know what I mean by that, Joe, is you know, for you to have those challenging conversations and for you to have the credibility with the business to give you the seat at the table, the business ought to see you beyond just you know, a training manager or an L&D manager, right? You've got to be able to clearly communicate that you've got ideas and you know, you have an understanding of the business which extends beyond just understanding your functional domain, right? So I often recommend, you know, even to my team members to actually jump into business reviews or business meetings, which may have nothing to do with learning and development per se, and just contribute, you know, as experienced colleagues in the business. Now, what that does is that really helps the business see you as a credible colleague and not just as someone who's responsible for training. And what that does is, you know, when you then go back and say no, when you then go back and say, hey, there's a different way, there's a better way of doing this.
Yes, a very good point there, Sunder, I think. And it's about, sort of, often we can be quite good in our learning and development or our training skills and experience, but what we lack now is maybe sometimes business skills. Con asks in the Q&A pod a really good question. Con says, so Sunder, is there merit in having learning and development seconded to business for a few weeks or months? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, most good talent management programs will have learning and development or training as one of the pit stops in the track. But I think it's also important to educate the business managers on the nuances of learning and development. So just as an example, in one of the previous organizations I used to work for, we actually ran a program called, Training 101 for non-trainers, and which was very similar to finance for non-finance, which is a very popular course across most businesses. And really the objective of this program was to orient business managers around various nuances involved in commercial training. So whether how we do training management, how we do training ROI, just so that the business also has a much stronger and a better sense of appreciation for our challenges. So I think it's sort of both ways, but there's a lot of merit in
worked within learning and
training
development and
professionals doing
partnered
secondments
with
in
different
business
roles
and
or
vice
different
versa.
departments in an industry or a business. I've learned so much, and that's been really valuable. And there's been some great comments in the chat window along these lines as well. Thank you. Now, Anne Nash, a little bit earlier on in the chat window, we were talking about that point of need right at the beginning. And there was another really interesting point that I think that Anne made. Anne had said, however, we also need to have a responsibility to help people step back sometimes and reflect and plan their path. So this goes quite nicely, I think, Sunder, with what you're talking about there with regards our role of being training professionals. Now, this is another area of the L&D industry that I think is changing and updating, and this is about what we know as good quality learning and development practice. So Beverley and Don, I'll come to you with this one around, what are the things we're seeing in our industry at the moment about good quality learning practice. Now, Beverley, we talked a little bit at the CIPD L&D conference about having a background with regards scientific, rigorous, good quality information helping us to develop. What are your thoughts around that, Beverley?
So I guess for me, it's a bigger question really about what kind of knowledge, skills, background, qualities we're looking for in our L&D professionals now. And we've just been exchanging a few thoughts in the chat box on that. I think when I'm looking for certainly people from my team, I'm looking for evidence around the consultancy cycle. So I'm looking for people who can manage stakeholders, who can build rapport, who can build relationships. Also people who understand analytics, who can think in a logical, analytical way, who can identify a problem, generate solutions to that problem, and then present the options. But also, in terms of the consultancy cycle, I'm looking for people who are prepared to challenge stakeholders and to have those difficult conversations, I guess. So I'm looking for people who have skills around the whole of the consultancy cycle. And I think we shouldn't really be making decisions or recommending courses of action without some kind of evidence to support that, whether that's L&D evidence in terms of we understand how people learn, or whether that's business data in terms of we know where your teams aren't performing. So I'll give you an example of that. So obviously in an organization with a sales force, there's a massive amount of data that we can access there about performance. So we can pinpoint where that sales performance is strongest and where it's weakest, and we can make decisions about where on that spectrum do we put the intervention to make the most difference. So for me, we've got to move away from these blanket, everybody, one size fits all, shove them through it all together, to actually, the evidence suggests that there's a pocket of people who are exceptional. So what do we do with them? There's a pocket of people who maybe the opening in the sales call is not delivering what they want. So how do we target that? So for me, it's about tailoring interventions for the data that we've got and making decisions around that.
Points there. So it's some scientific element, there's some process element and doing that really well, but also there's just using the data we've got. And there's all sorts of different stuff out on the web that you can look on people's blogs about making sure that whatever data you've got, you're using it really well, you're interrogating it, and you're making decisions based on that. So Don, I know your webcam stopped working, but you're still there, aren't you, Don?
Yes, I am, Joe. Sorry. I wasn't trying to give you a half.
That's fine.
I had my microphone on mute and I forgot. So
we're talking about kind of.
I think Beverley's point.
So we're talking about the need for kind of modern L&D practice, and Beverley was talking about performance consulting skills, using analytical data, and so on. What are your thoughts around modern L&D skills and the state of our industry as it is right now?
Well, I think the point Beverley makes about the ability to analyze is a very good one. And I would add to that the ability, and that's specifically the ability to analyze data, find trends. And I'd add to that, although I think Beverley actually made the point, but I'd like to bring out that point, that it's really crucial to understand the difference between correlation and cause and effect, and also what makes a rigorous case for something and what doesn't. Too often we jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, look, we did A, and then B happened. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that A caused B. And if we believe it does, then I'm afraid if we go and present that as a solution to people, all too often we'll be shot down by people who've got a better sense elsewhere in the business of what causation really is. So I think that's it's a great point. That the consulting cycle Beverley talks about is something that we need to have a skill base where people have that rigorous look, where we don't go looking for something that supports the answer we want. We go out looking for what the data can tell us, which is different, and we're rigorous about it. So I think that's a really crucial skill. But of course, as well as that, and I also want to come back, if I may, to what I think the original question was alluding to as well. But as well as that point about the ability to ask those questions, I do believe the ability to listen and see beyond the words that people are presenting is terribly important as well. So if people are simply saying, well, I want a training course, and we're likely to say, yes, I want a training course, that's a very superficial example. We have to go underneath that and understand why. If people say, well, I can't do it because I haven't got the budget, we have to look underneath that and understand, is it a political reason? Are there other reasons for not doing it? And so on. Very often in L&D, we tend to, unfortunately, not be as sophisticated in our listening as we should be. But coming back to, I think, one point that the original question was alluding to, which was about, was talking about the need to do things in the short term. I think it's also important to do things in the long term, for long-term skills development of people. The question was talking about the need to reflect. That's certainly true, but I think also we need, as well as doing the short-term stuff, meeting stuff in the immediate point of need, we also need to meet the demands in the longer-term point of need. So in having conversations about where things are failing now, we also need to have conversations about where performance probably needs to be bridged 3 months down the line, 1 year down the line. You don't get engineers by giving people an iPad with a performance support tool on it. You get them by having them go through a long development process. And we mustn't lose track of the fact that that's part of our job, as well as the short-term stuff.
Gosh, Don, what brilliant points that you make here. I think it's absolutely great. There's loads of chat going on as well around educating business on quality training. I think that's a good point, Con, that we'll definitely come back to. And Beverley's made some very good points about PR that I think we should come back to as well. So please do use that chat window, guys. Now, Sunder, on that point that Don was making with regard to that kind of long-term development, that we need to look at that, what are your thoughts around that long-term performance need?
I think in the long term, the responsibility of the learning department is to really enable the learners to learn themselves. So really, help a learner appreciate the value of self-help platforms. And I think that's going to be the only sustainable way to have a learning culture for organizations, 2, 3, 5 years down the line. So how do we put together structures, platforms, processes such that when a learner has a moment of need, they have the ability to pull the information that they need at a time of their choice on a device of their choice, without having to depend on the learning and development manager. I know it can be a scary thought for a lot of L&D folks because it does sort of question our own relevance. But I guess it's important to sort of move into that self-serve culture. A lot of people are calling it the bring your own learning culture, which is again sort of a take on the bring your own devices, which one heard a couple of years back. So I think people are increasingly bringing their own learning into the enterprise. Our job is to really curate, make
Lean and
recommendations,
mean. I love
and then
that,
help
Sunder.
people
Thank
discover
you. Now, you wrote for us
platforms through
recently
which
on
they can
Training
learn on
Journal
their own.
about some
So,
micro learning
going
and
forward
making
in the
that very
long term, I
bite-sized. I think
see
that's a really
very
nice,
lean
good
and
example
mean
of what you're
L&D
talking about
teams.
here and having that need and performance, or that point of need, I think, isn't it? Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, in our business, as I said, I've got a distributed workforce. So for me, micro-learning is the only way to get information across, because, any time that I pull my learners out of the markets, it is time away from a customer. And obviously, there's an opportunity cost. There's a dollar value associated with that. So how do we embed learning in the workflow of, an employee or a colleague? And for you to do that as a learning professional, you need to have a strong understanding of what, a day in the life of a colleague looks like. Because if you don't understand what a day in the life of a colleague looks like, you wouldn't know what are the opportunities, for you to sort of really create learning moments. And that's where micro-learning comes into play. So when they have a little bit of time, if they, have contextual information available to them at a device on which they can access it quickly, I think there is an incentive for them to then pull it, update themselves, and be better prepared to go and have a conversation with a customer. I think that's the direction I
Brilliant.
see
Thank you very much,
generally,
Sunder. And I certainly
the
see a
learning
lot of that
industry moving
in
into,
my own work as well. It's like I
shorter,
don't need to go on a
more
course. I just
relevant,
need to go and
and
Google
more
something and go,
ongoing
oh, that's
type
how
of
I do it.
engagements,
And
which is
a
what, in
million
my
other
view,
examples
micro-learning
that
is
we
all
can
about.
come up with. Thank you, Sunder. Now, in the chat room, Beverley, we have a question for you. Frank says, Beverley, what do you think about Sunder's points about self-learning platforms, self-service? And once again, he's very polite and says, thanks very much in advance. Your thoughts, Beverley?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think what I'm finding is that if we can provide a really user-friendly platform for people to learn the things that they want to, that is just about videos, checklists, chats, blogs, things that I know kind of what I need to do. I just need some support, some help with something specific. So if we can provide that in a way that it's self-managed, then that frees us up to focus on the really critical big ticket items. And I think that for me, that's really important, that we're not going to get traction in the business on the big ticket items until we've done a really good job with helping these people to learn the stuff that they want to learn, the basic stuff that they need. So until we get people something that they can have on project management, presentation skills, influencing, difficult conversations, the stuff that comes up all the time, until we can provide a really great self-managed solution in that space, we are not going to be in a really good position then to have the conversations with the business about how can we build your capability in this area over the next 18 months. Because there will always be that noise there about, yes, but people want to know how to do this, that, and the other. So I think those things for me go hand in hand. So I think you need to have a really good learning management system, social platform, whatever it is. People can learn at their own time, own pace, point of need. And then coupled with that, that frees you up then to have those more strategic conversations about where do you want your department to be in 18 months, and what capability do you need to build to get there, and then what programs can we help partner with you to design and deliver that.
Thank you very much, Beverley. I think there's lots of really good points that you're making there. And whilst we're talking to you, Beverley, I'm going to continue. You mentioned a little bit earlier on in that chat window about you need to be good at marketing and PR, and a large part of your role is selling your services and demonstrating your value. And Don carried on that conversation in the chat window about us having PR and marketing skills. What are your thoughts on that, Beverley? Just expand on that again for me, please.
Yeah, I think this is really important, and I think for an internal function, sometimes with the greatest respect, you can get a bit lazy about assuming that people will use your services because you're there. And actually, even if it's purely from a professional point of view, I don't think that's right. But I think because there's so much complexity to our business now, things are moving so quickly, it's really easy to get lost, to get forgotten. So a big part of my role now is to market the team and to create materials, or to go to team meetings, to present at conferences, whatever it might be, to demonstrate that we're here, we've got great expertise, we should be your first call when you want something to do with development. So for me, that's a big part of my role, is marketing my team, celebrating success, sharing case studies, sharing stories, applying for awards even internally, because it gets us the recognition that we need to really get to the strategic issues. So for me, my team has a brand, we've got a logo, we've got a look and a feel. I'm really clear with my team about how we communicate, about what our materials should look like, about the standard that I expect. And for me, it should be better.
That's a really interesting point that you make there, Beverley. Thank you so much about kind of doing an internal L&D department. Now, we've got a really good question from Jennifer Lindsay Finnan, who says, do you think the changes and trends that have been discussed today apply to external trainers too, such as freelance, self-employed trainers working in many different smaller organisations? Jennifer, that's an absolutely great question. Now, we know that Beverley and Sunder are both working in larger organisations. I'm freelance, and Don, you've got, I think, a really good broad view of this. So let me throw this question to you first of all. Do you think the things that we're talking about today are applying to external freelance trainers?
They absolutely are, and there's an additional issue as well. If you're an external, particularly if you're a freelancer, you don't have the daily connection with the business on a non-customer client relationship basis. In other words, you don't necessarily pick up on all the trends that are going on. What does this mean? Well, for a lot of people I know who are in the freelance market, they can't understand why the price for what they've got is falling, particularly if they're a classroom trainer, or if they're delivering the production of e-learning content. The reason why it's falling is that increasingly those two particular products are becoming commoditized, or services are becoming commoditized, because more people are coming into that space because they've been let go by companies, and also because organizations have a sophisticated apparatus now for producing content themselves, and they're doing less classroom training. So there's greater supply, less demand. You don't see that if you're working for yourself, because you're excluded from that decision-making process and the wider information about it. So I think if you're a freelancer, depending on the field you're in, things can be quite tough right now. So I think one of the key things I'd say in terms of advice, not that you're asking me for advice, but if I was going to give advice for a freelancer, I'd say, for goodness sake, get out and network with other freelancers, become part of a body, and make sure you're picking up on what the trends are from elsewhere, because nobody's going to tell you if you're just by yourself. On top of that, yes, everything else we've been talking about here also applies. It just makes it a much tougher environment to flourish in. But Joe, I know I've been talking in a negative way. You're a freelancer.
No,
You're
it
very
certainly isn't, and
so it's
I
not
always say
bad
it's
for
a nice
everybody out there,
problem
is
to
it?
have, to be busy, and I'm very grateful for that. But you're absolutely right. I wouldn't be busy if I didn't look at those trends and do things such as go to conferences, go to the free shows. There's so much free content out there. We've got a whole conversation going on this week around, how do I use social media for my professional development? And whilst, we're not talking about business development necessarily, it all rolls into one. Without a professional profile, I wouldn't have the work and stuff that I've got. And that goes along with networking. It goes along with knowing what's in your industry and being able to spot those trends. That's exactly what this conversation is about. There are things that I'm seeing that I'm thinking, right, I want to do something on that because I can see that will give me work, it will be interesting, it will be valuable, not just I've got hours in my day and I need to make a profit. So all of those things are really good that you're talking about there.
Yeah.
So I think, though, let's go to Sunder. And Sunder, I don't know if you employ any freelancers at all or how you work with that. But it would be interesting to think, how can you see what you're doing in the industry now and apply that maybe externally? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, when we sort of make hiring decisions about, bringing external partners on board, this is an important consideration because what increasingly happens now is we don't hire external freelance trainers for piecemeal or one-off programs. Whatever they're delivering, whether it's classroom or virtual, actually happens to be part of a larger learning track or a learning journey. So, you know, several pit stops within that particular learning track are online, mobile, and social, right? So the freelance trainer who comes on board to deliver one part of the learning track needs to have an appreciation of what has already happened, let's say on the enterprise social network. Often we will tell our freelance trainers to deliver a couple of virtual classrooms even before they come and deliver, a live session with the audience. Or we will tell them to do a follow-up virtual classroom. So, these are just examples of why we expect our freelancers to be as aware and as sort of connected to what's happening in the environment. Because if they don't have an appreciation of other parts of the learning track, just coming in and delivering their piece is obviously not going to cut the ice. So very important for independent trainers to stay updated on what the modern challenges
That's
are.
a really good
and
way of
also
putting that,
connect
Sunder.
with,
Thank you. Beverley, any thoughts on
buyers
that
of
before I
learning
move on to
services
our
and
next
understand,
question from
what
the
sort of
Q&A
track they're
pod?
putting together so they can contribute meaningfully to those.
Thank you. So I've got a brilliant question here from Frank Halberg. Frank, you have been on it today. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. Frank says, a question to all of you. How do you define the purpose of what you do in one sentence? So it's a no pressure and no challenge from Frank there. So how do we define the purpose of what we do in one sentence? Let's go to Don first. Don, I'm going to put you totally on the spot here. What do you think?
Before I answer it, I've got to say everyone has this problem. You're at a party, someone says, what do you do? If you talk about you're in training or learning, then immediately you're portrayed as a classroom trainer. If you say anything else, then typically you're then avoided for the rest of the party because you're something to do with e-learning compliance courses. So my answer is I help organizations and individuals do their job better. That's it.
I love that, Don. It's almost like you've said that before. Thank you so much. So let's go to Sunder. What do you think, Sunder? Do you have an answer for Frank about how do you define the purpose of what you do in one sentence? Ah, fantastic, Sunder. Thank you so much. And Beverley, you know what's
Well,
coming now.
I help colleagues learn smarter, faster, better, so they can do their jobs better. So that's
Yeah,
my
I do.
definition.
So this is actually our team's mission statement. So we work in partnership with the business to
Gosh, that's
build
fantastic.
critical
Thank you,
capabilities.
Beverley. And I don't know whether the question applied to me, but I'm going to say something anyway. I think it's all about bringing around those light bulb moments in learning, in development, and just supporting people and making them happy. I think that's where I would go with that. And some really good stuff going on in the chat windows here, guys, about what people are sharing. So Sunder and Donald have shared that in the chat window, and some really good links being shared as well. So there's some lovely stuff going on there, some things that people have written, some external stuff to go and have a look at. Now, we are in our last 4 minutes. I cannot believe this hour has just absolutely disappeared, and it's been an absolute pleasure so far. So I'm going to go on to probably my last main question, but if you've got any pressing thoughts, guys, please let us know either in that Q&A pod or in the chat window. So one of the things that came up earlier on that Konstantidis said was that educating the business on what quality training and learning looks like is part of the partnership learning and development needs to develop with the business. And if I'm interpreting Con correctly, I think it's all about not just going with e-learning, not just going with, okay, here's our training menu. Any final thoughts on this, guys? So let's go to Beverley first, and we'll work our way back round through Sunder and Don. So Beverley, any thoughts here on learning and development, helping the business with understanding what good quality learning and development is?
Yeah, this is so critical and very topical at the moment. So I think this is an area where we can really add value. It's about how people learn and how to ensure that the behavior that you want to be changed, developed actually is. And I think this is a really critical area of expertise all around neuroscience, around behavioral science. And as L&D professionals, I think it's critical for us to understand this. So a practical example would be if you've ring-fenced a couple of hours for a workshop session, and I'm sure people on the line will recognize this, it gets cut. So you start off with 2 hours, and then, oh, there's a critical meeting, so you've got an hour and a half. Oh, we just need to get people on a TC, so it's an hour. Oh, and actually there's a point at which you have to say, it's not worth you running this anymore, because in order to get people to really learn that skill, they need amount of time to review, reflect, practice, get feedback, and actually you've cut it so far now that it's not going to work. So I think that we need to have that expertise. We also need to be challenging back to say, if you want that type of capability build or behavioral change, it's going to happen, but you need, a series of sessions, you need reinforcement, you need the manager to be involved. So we need to understand the dynamics.
Brilliant, Beverley, thank you. And that leads me nicely to say we actually have a neuroscience webinar later this week, and I've put the link into our webinars page. So Sunder, very briefly, what are your thoughts about educating the business on good quality L&D?
Well, I think it goes a step back. I would urge the learning professionals to stay invested. When was the last time you attended a good quality conference? When was the last time you took a self-learning course? When was the last time you engaged in a webinar like, such as the one that you're hosting? Because if you don't know what good quality learning, what good quality engagement looks like, you cannot be, communicating that in a credible fashion to your business. So I think it starts with us. So my ask to my teams and my ask to fellow colleagues would be to just remain invested, keep your eyes and ears open, have a good, deep understanding of
so well
what good looks
and
like
Don, our last
in the
point
learning
on
business.
this very
Because
briefly,
when you know
what are
that
your
yourself,
thoughts on
you are in a much better position
sharing
to
what
communicate that
good
to your
quality L&D
customers.
is with the business?
I agree with both Sunder and Beverley, but particularly Sunder's point that it starts with us. I think educate ourselves first, make sure that we know what good L&D is. And you know what? That means also being tough with ourselves. Challenge what you think. I am still having conversations with people about learning styles. You know what? If you read the research, the metadata studies, there is no support for learning styles. And there are other things out there as well, which we are currently using, which have no scientific basis. Challenge yourselves. Go out there, and then, as Beverley says, be effective. Challenge the snipping away the treatment of L&D as a pizza delivery service that will get you your learning in the next 35 minutes. And instead, then you'll be seen as a credible business partner that knows what it's talking about and delivers. It starts with us.
Oh,
Joan.
fabulous. Well, I could not say that any better than the rest of you guys. Thank you so much for your time. We're at the end of our hour. I cannot believe it's gone past so quickly. So a huge, huge thank you to Sunder Ramachandran, Beverley Aylott and Donald H. Taylor. I've put some information in the link section at the bottom there. You can just copy and paste that. Also, thank you so much to our sponsors, Give Back UK, an absolutely brilliant charity. Go and have a look at them. This training session will be available on our website, trainingjournal.com, along with all the other webinars we've got this week. You can join the conversation and keep it going all week with the TJwow hashtag on Twitter. And what's our webinar tomorrow? It's all about why should I use social media for my own professional development? We have Suk Pabial, Michelle Parry-Slater and Constantidis, who's been on our session today and actually told you about a conversation he's having in about an hour, I think it is, Con, if you want to drop that link into the session again. And Con, I've just seen your cheeky comment. Where is our smiley sheet evaluation? I think it's called Twitter, Con. That's how I'm doing it today. Everybody, you have been fabulous with your questions, your comments, your chat, your Twitter conversations. Please have a fabulous day, and round of applause for our guests. Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye.